can't believe I just died again. This game is a real meat grinder.
And now you have to start at level 1 again because of our Dungeon Master's house rules.
You suck!
You know, this rule has affected all of us, and I feel that overall it detracts from the sum total of fun in the game. Perhaps our Dungeon Master would consider changing it.
No, this is the house rule we're using. We've talked about this before.
Yeah, but Mr. Dungeon Master, sir, none of us like this rule. It's just not very fun.
Look, I'm the Dungeon Master. My word is law. If you don't like the rules, you can leave.
Indeed, that is a fine idea.
Wait, where are you guys going? Hey, wait, come back here. You can't just leave. I'm the Dungeon Master. Who do you think's in charge around here? Okay, fine, I'll just play D&D by myself then. You hear that? I don't need you. Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today in the Lair, we're going to be talking about the top 10 absolute worst house rules in Dungeons & Dragons. See, I'm in the middle of an entire video series on house rules, and I thought it might also be valuable to go over the things Dungeon Masters should consider not doing, because avoiding pitfalls is important too. Now, this list will include things I personally have experienced as a player. However, I also pinged you all not too long ago over my community tab about the worst house rules you've experienced. So I've included some particularly juicy, that is horrendous, house rules from there too. Before we jump in, I just want to remind you that I have a bunch of free D&D adventures available over on my site, thedmlair.com, for Dungeon Masters looking for pre-made content. These are adventures that I personally created and ran for my groups, and you essentially get my DM notes and maps. I also wanted to call your attention to that shiny join button down below. If you click there, you'll get some information about becoming a channel member and the benefits thereof. Things like access to a VP Discord channel, monthly hangouts with me, stuff like that. It's also a great way to just support the content I create if you'd like to do so. And now that the plugs are out of the way, onto the list of horrible house rules. Oh, and by the way, if you use any of these house rules and are mildly offended by their inclusion here, well, how's that saying go? Sorry, not sorry? Number 1, critical fumbles on a natural 1 attack roll. Holy crap, it is amazing how much players hate critical fumbles. It doesn't matter if you're using a stupid table to look up results or just saying dumb stuff like your weapon flies out of your hand or your weapon breaks. Yeah, let's find a way to unevenly punish melee players over spellcaster players and unevenly punish the players who usually get more attacks over the enemies. Oh, and let's not mention how much it bogs the game down by having to roll on the tables and determine results. I personally have never had players who enjoyed critical fumbles. In my experience, they are nearly universally hated by players. I did use them several years ago in my Sword Coast Guard game, and they didn't last but maybe 3 sessions before it became clear that we all hated them. Number 2, rerolling your character at level 1 when they die. Okay, look, dying and having to reroll a character sucks enough for players. Like, many players just don't like it. It is merely adding insult to injury to make them reroll their level 16 character at level 1. Now, I get that this may be the old school gritty way of doing things, and that's great and all. And I can appreciate nostalgia about how folks used to do things back in the day as much as the next person. But I feel like today's players may just be a wee bit different. So if I die, I can live with that. I personally don't mind it when my PC dies because it's an opportunity for me to try out a different cool build I might have in mind. But please, don't make me start at level 1 again. It sucks for lots of actual game reasons, not just because I'm a special snowflake or something. Number 3, screwing with the experience points system, specifically in ways that make it unbalanced for players. For instance, the worst way to tweak the XP system is to only award XP to the character who dealt the killing blow. So that crowd control wizard who makes your battles a crap ton easier via hold monster or hypnotic pattern or banishment or any number of amazing spells but rarely kills anything, just kind of gets the shaft. Or just awarding experience points randomly or at the Dungeon Master's discretion, often favoring certain players. Oh, the Dungeon Master is a thespian themselves and gives more XP to players who exhibit that same behavior. Or the DM loves combat and gives more XP to players who excel in that area. No, pass please. How about we don't make D&D a competition between players? Like seriously, one of the things that distinguishes D&D from other games is a huge, compelling gameplay component in that players don't compete with each other. Let's not ruin that, shall we? Number 4, permanent injury tables triggered by critical hits or similar game mechanics. These things are horrible, especially the ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I mean, some of these injuries are so bad that you might as well just re-roll your character. A lost arm, a reduction to the bard's charisma score, a permanent limp, reducing movement. I mean, come on, that stuff is crap. Number 5, punishments for not role-playing your alignment properly. Come on, let's take one of the most contentious topics of D&D and weaponize it. Yeah, that's right. I'm sure that'll be fun. And what am I talking about? Well, the fact that almost no one can agree on what defines any particular alignment. That is, most folks have a different idea of what things like lawful good and chaotic good even mean. So the chances are very high a Dungeon Master will have a different understanding of alignment than their players. And if in-game punishments are involved for not role-playing your alignment, then players will usually end up screwed. Either they get punished with loss of experience points or something similar, or they are forced to role-play their character according to the DM's definition of alignment. And that effectively steals player agency, something I've stated before as being something a Dungeon Master should avoid doing at all costs. Number 6, house rules that nerf class abilities or core game mechanics. Now look, I'll be the first one to admit to being guilty of doing this. I now, however, strive to always discuss these sorts of changes with my players first, and then only change things when absolutely necessary. For instance, my players and I have spoken about the spell Healing Spirit, and we universally agree that it's horribly overpowered as written. The feat Elven Accuracy is another example. The problem I see is when Dungeon Masters nerf things due to a lack of understanding of game mechanics, or because they just don't like them. And then, furthermore, when they nerf things without first discussing what they perceive as the issue with their players. It's always best to talk to players and see if a mutual agreement can be reached. Number 7, rolling ability scores in order. So your first roll is strength, the second roll is your dexterity, and so on. Now I personally don't have quite as high an aversion to this idea as others, but I do know that many players hate this. Now, some Dungeon Masters will say that this will encourage your players to play classes that they ordinarily wouldn't play. They may also appeal to nostalgia about how back in the day, this is how it was done. And you may have noticed this, but in general, I kind of hate appealing to nostalgia just for the sake of nostalgia. Like, convince me with logical arguments and facts, not just some flighty, well, back in the day statement. I mean, back in the day, thousands of people died from polio every year, but none of us want that again, do we? Anyway, the main problem with this house rule is that it prevents players from playing characters that they actually want to play. Oh, you wanted to be a ranged fighter or a rogue? Tough luck! Your dexterity is 8! And you know what? Most players just don't find that to be a whole lot of fun. Number 8. Skill checks automatically succeeding on natural 20s. So I suspect that in part, this exists not because Dungeon Masters make it a house rule, but because they just simply don't understand the actual game rules. Only attack rolls are auto success on natural 20s, not ability or skill checks. Rolling a natural 20 on a persuasion check will not allow me to convince the king to abdicate his throne. Rolling a natural 20 on a stealth check will not allow me to hide from an enemy who's staring directly at me while I have fairy fire outlining my form. If an Arcana check DC is 25, the barbarian doesn't magically know the secrets of arcane runes because he got lucky on a 5% chance. Simply put, some things are just not possible. Number 9. any house rule that allows the Dungeon Master to take away player agency. Now, I know this is a loose grouping rather than a specific rule, but I hear lots of these. And usually they are made up on the spot by a capricious Dungeon Master who just doesn't like something. For instance, a Dungeon Master overruling a player's actions because that's not what your character would do. Who actually should be the judge of what a player's character would or would not do, if not the player themselves? Number 10. Any house rule that favors the enemies but not the players. For instance, ruling that enemies get infinite reactions to use on attacks of opportunity, but that players don't get to do the same. Basically, the rule of thumb that I go by in my games is that if it works for the Dungeon Master, it works for the players, and vice versa. Let me know the house rule you hate the most from a game you've been in. Next week, I'll be talking about something interesting, I'm sure, but until then, click right here to learn about 7 house rules you can use to improve your D&D game. And until next time, let's play D&D.